Okay, I think we can start. I'm on speaker view, Paul. Paul and Alan, are you recording? And Paul, have you turned on the live stream?
You're live on YouTube.
Okay, great. Wonderful. So first of all, welcome everyone to this International Manifesto Group seminar on the geopolitical economy of Central and Eastern Ukraine amid the Ukraine conflict. My name is Radhe, and I convene the International Manifesto Group. On the face of it, it would seem that the stance of countries of Eastern and Central Europe in the war over Ukraine is very simple. They are hostile to the Russian Federation, which they see as the successor state of an allegedly oppressive Soviet Union, and therefore they support the West's efforts in Ukraine and those of the government of that country. Indeed, the war over Ukraine is even seen and widely reported to have increased the moral authority of these countries within the European Union and NATO, and also in the West more generally, bringing them from the peripheries of these collectivities of the Western Alliance in general into the center of it. However, one has to only scratch the surface of this discourse, which emanates chiefly from the West, to see that matters are considerably more complex. At the international level, while undoubtedly the United States and the UK in particular wish to promote the idea of East European hostility to Russia and the idea that it has proved morally right, while the Franco-German wish to make terms with Russia has proved morally compromised. And this, of course, is very handy in terms of propaganda. And undoubtedly, this posturing is also part of the propaganda that forms such a large part of the war, because as many of you probably realize, a large part of this war is fought in propaganda terms rather than actually on any battlefield. So, and this war is also being undertaken in substantial part against the old Western economic powerhouses of Europe. At the same time, propaganda alone is not going to so easily displace their dominance within the European Union, and propaganda alone is not going to change very rapidly. There's still continuing structural reliance on some sort of compromise with Russia. So the countries of Central and Eastern Europe have neither the demographic nor the economic weight to wield much influence in Europe, and nor, in fact, are they as united in their stance in the current war as they are often portrayed as being. While Poland, the Baltic republics, the Czech Republic, Sweden, Finland, etc., have generally been most unambiguously in favor of the US approach, the four other nations of the so-called Bucharest Nine, which came together in 2015 against an ostensible Russian threat, namely Hungary, Romania, Bulgaria, and Slovakia, support the war less fulsomely. Internally, too, while the far from benign influence of EU membership on the economies of these countries, combined with a weak and weakened left, has tended to give rise to forms of right-wing politics, which are pitted against the EU and often even NATO in ways that make unity in the Ukraine context more difficult. So at the popular level, there are a number of factors which also complicate this opposition to Russia. Despite decades of Western propaganda and many ambiguities about the communist period, in many countries, memories of liberation from fascism by the Soviet Union have not faded among substantial sections of the population, even in countries like Poland, whose population is reported to be solidly on Ukraine's side. Economic difficulties, including inflation caused by the war, comes on top of the already less than spectacular post-communist economic performance of many of these countries, many of which have been reduced to the status of being labor exporters. Of course, the influx of refugees creates new strains, and some countries have national minorities in Ukraine. So if we consider just the most and least supportive countries, Poland and Hungary, we find a rather complicated picture. So Poland has been on the forefront of support from Ukraine, sending weapons, including fighter jets and tanks most recently, and accepting a very large number of refugees outside Russia. There are tensions, however, between Ukraine and Poland on account of official support in Ukraine of the Bandera tradition, which is still remembered to have massacred up to 100,000 Poles in the Second World War. Moreover, Poland also expects to benefit economically at the end of the war and even during the war for its support, while also perhaps expecting to gain the disputed city of what's called Lviv or Lvov, depending on which country you're in. Meanwhile, in Hungary, which is ruled by a leader with a long record of closeness to Russia and China, Hungary is successfully resisting EU and US pressure to fall in line on Ukraine and the West, opposing further aid to Ukraine, calling for negotiations and stating publicly that Ukraine cannot win the war, when the whole Western stance is premised on an ultimate Ukrainian victory. At least that's what they claim. With its EU funds, which were already withheld because of alleged corruption well before the war started, Hungary has also had Western sanctions imposed on its corporations for alleged dealing with Russian entities. But none of these measures have changed Hungary's stance, which is also delaying Swedish membership of NATO. So in addition to the countries that are part of NATO and the EU, moreover, in this region, there are other countries, such as Serbia, for example, which find themselves also out of sync with the rest of Europe. So how are we to understand the positions in which these countries of Central and Western Europe find themselves, and the positions which they have taken in the context of the war? We have organized this webinar in the hope that our speakers, as a very distinguished set of speakers, will help us understand what's going on these questions and many others, which I'm sure I haven't even thought about. So what I'm going to do is we're going to get started with the speeches. I'm going to introduce the speakers in turn. They will speak for about 12 odd minutes each. Then we will end this formal presentation part, and we will open the webinar to questions and answers from the floor. Please note that it would be best if you ask questions in person by using the raise hand function, which is at the bottom of your screen. The chat will remain open throughout this, and we urge you to please, which you are already using, which is great, please continue using it respectfully with one another. We will try to keep the whole event down to 2 hours. So with that having been said, let me introduce the first speaker. The first speaker is Dr. Anna Maria Artner. She's a political economist, senior research fellow at the Institute of World Economics at the Center of Economic and Regional Studies. She's also professor at the Milton Friedman University in Budapest. She has studied imperialism. I'm sure something that Milton Friedman does not agree with her views or her topics of study, but she has studied imperialism, the transformation of the world system, global capital accumulation, labor markets, crises, and their socioeconomic consequences. Her recent publications are A New World is Born, Russia's Anti-Imperialist Fight in Ukraine, Samir Amin and the Changing of the World, Planning and Social Change, Can China Lead the World? These are just some articles of hers that have appeared in International Critical Thought, in the journal Critique, and in Third World Quarterly. So Anna Maria, please go ahead. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much for inviting me to this event. And the questions what Radhe have risen are very complicated and very numerous, so I cannot answer all the aspects. I have prepared a PowerPoint presentation, and I will try to answer some of the questions which have been raised. Do you see my presentation?
Yep.
Okay. Okay. Well, I am starting. Okay. So I will touch two questions. One is the economic impact of the war, and the second is the consequences of the war on the region's international position. So first of all, I think we should be aware of the characteristics of Central and Eastern European countries. They are what I call integrated periphery of the European center, and they are characterized by smaller firms, weaker competitiveness, openness to the world market, and dependence on Western countries, particularly on Germany. Because of their geographical proximity and historical economic connections with Russia and Ukraine, the Central and Eastern European countries have been dependent on energy imports from Russia and exports to both Russia and Ukraine. The cheap energy in the Central and Eastern Europe has been a key factor for investments of German companies in the region. As far as the industry is concerned, the fall of the export of Germany to Russia due to the Ukrainian war has been compensated by the rise of its exports to CEE, which destroys or risks the markets and competitiveness of the companies in CEE. So it is also a consequence of the peripheral position of the region. Because of the geographical location and the importance of agriculture, the issue of Ukrainian grain exports hit the CEE countries. Probably you are aware of this problematic, the Ukrainian wheat, maize, rapeseed, and sunflower that was said to be delivered to poor African countries, stuck in CEE and has been sold there, and it caused a problem for agriculture in Poland, Hungary, Slovakia, Romania, Bulgaria. Furthermore, through their affiliates, Central and Eastern European banks are relatively have a relatively greater exposure in Russia and Ukraine than the Western banks have. So some CEE economies are more vulnerable to external shocks, more inclined to inflation, and more dependent on foreign capital resources like credits and structural funds of the European Union and the foreign direct investments of Germany. Some illustrations about what I said. You can see here the increase in the share of firms reporting losses in percentage point. And you see here that these are mostly the Central and Eastern European countries whose firms were badly affected by this conflict due to the higher energy prices and suspension of exports to Ukraine, Russia, and Belarus. There's another.
Waldemar, we don't see the slides changing. I see the first slide still. That's.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Okay, thank you for saying that. I don't know what I'm now.
Okay, now it's okay.
That's okay. Though you can see now the slides and also that I changed them.
Yes, but now we are back to the title slide again.
Okay, but then I try to change. This is the second one. You see the second one?
No.
Okay, then I stop projecting and I will show you the PowerPoint in this format. Is it okay then for you? Do you see the slides and all the slides on the left-hand side?
No. The thing is, you're not in. You have to choose the what is it called, the projection mode, and then you have to move the slides. You were not moving the slides, I don't think.
But I moved. I did it. I did, and you don't see. I don't know what should be the problem. I can
press F5. Press F5, and then it might be better. F5. Yeah. Now it's.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Is it okay? Two questions. So can you see this slide? Two questions. Economic impact of the war.
No, we are seeing the third slide. You should be able to see your slides as well as you change them.
Okay. Well, I see my.
Now the two questions. Now it's okay.
And now we are seeing the two questions. Yes.
And now.
And now we are seeing characteristics of CEE.
Fine. Okay, then I shouldn't have chosen this projecting mode. Okay, F5 is not working. Does not work. here. Okay, so then characteristics of the CE I have already explained, and here is the slide from European Investment Bank. I mean the figure from European Investment Bank, which symbolizes how much Central and Eastern European countries, the firms in these countries, have been affected by the war due to higher energy prices and suspension of exports to Ukraine, Russia, and Belarus. And the next one is a figure, a map made by European Investment Bank, which shows that the periphery of the European Union, the firms in the peripheries of the European Union are more vulnerable and have been badly affected by the war, the synthetic vulnerability, which weights free sources of firms' vulnerabilities, like reduction in exports, lower profit due to higher energy prices, and difficulty finding funding as banks avoid risks. So all these factors and the synthetic vulnerability is more characteristic for Central and Eastern Europe and the southern periphery of the European Union. So, however, I would emphasize the asymmetric interdependence between Central and Eastern Europe and Germany. The German economy has been built on 3 legs: cheap energy from Russia, outsourcing to Central and Eastern Europe, and exports to the world, but after 2008, mainly to the East, mainly to China. As a mirror, Central and Eastern Europe had been built on cheap energy from Russia, on FDI from Germany, and on exportation. So it means that these two entities are strongly interconnected, but in an asymmetric way. But we can underline that if Central and Eastern Europe declines Germany too, and vice versa. So I think we must evaluate the impacts of this war in this context. And now something about the inflation, which was already mentioned by Radhe. It has grown much faster than in the region than in other European countries. This has evaporated the purchasing power of wages, so that the population of Central and Eastern Europe suffered more than the people of other member states of the EU. Well, to continue, the government policies applied in connection with fueling war or to mitigate the negative effects of sanctions were like increasing military spending, subsidizing fuel prices, costs of accommodating refugees, investments in energy security, increasing interest rates to curb inflation, and so on. So all these policies increased government spending, and this can result in a growing public deficit and indebtedness in the near future. Although this problem hasn't appeared yet, as this slide shows, for example, here you see that the quarterly government debt between the last quarter of 2021 and the last quarter of 2022 decreased in most of the countries of the European Union, including Central and Eastern Europe. Also, Czechia and Estonia have been affected badly and performed badly in this respect as well. And here you see the trend in the government debt, and it is also declining more or less. Of course, further analysis would need. As a response to the inflation, central banks of the region have raised interest rates. This curbed investments and lowered economic growth, as this figure shows. Central and Eastern European countries can easily get into a downward spiral, I think, a vicious circle. But I would add that it is particularly true for Germany, and because of Germany, and because Germany, as its competitiveness will decline in the absence of the Russian and maybe the Russian relations. So if the German competitiveness declines, then this vicious circle can reach Germany as well. Here you see another figure concerning the GDP growth in the region, and you see that more or less the countries had some kind of positive growth in a year, but Estonia and Lithuania have been the most serious situation concerning this this figure. So the long-term contracts on gas will expire in Ukraine, and Ukraine has already. Sorry for that, I am a little bit exciting. So the long-term contracts on gas from Russia will expire. And you know that the gas is coming through Ukraine. And Ukraine has already indicated that it doesn't want to renew these contracts. And this would mean a serious shortage in Eastern Europe as well as in Germany. In this context, the strategy of the Hungarian government is an excellent one, since it could provide gas by avoiding Ukraine through the Black Sea and Turkey. This is the so-called Turk Stream. And lastly, I would return to the consequences, the broader consequences on the region. Well, on the one hand, there are changes that has weakened the European Union. Beside the question marks about the future of the German economy, an increased division and tensions among the CEU countries work against the European cohesion. The traditionally good Polish-Hungarian connection have deteriorated, and the Visegrad 4 cooperation has been frozen. Despite the military cooperation, the relationship is also tense between Ukraine and other Central and Eastern European countries, because the Ukrainian wheat exports, or the minorities in Ukraine, or the celebration of Bandera, as Radhe mentioned. Poland is trying to strengthen its regional role, while Hungary attempts to keep and even strengthen its sovereignty regarding many issues. On the other hand, Central and Eastern European countries' reliability on the European Union funds has grown. The countries can be blackmailed into following the policy of NATO and European Union. Hungary is a textbook example of this situation. The imperialist forces of NATO and EU want to demonstrate with Hungary that no one is allowed to deviate from their command. This attempt of the European Union and NATO strengthens the EU. So we can say that by the war, a Polanyi double movement has been reinforced in the center of imperialism. Today, the Hungarian conservative government is the only outright opposition to the war, and it is trying to maintain its policy of opening in its foreign relations and to establish friendly relations with every country in the world. We can say, strangely enough, that the Hungarian conservative right-wing government is pursuing a kind of Wendung spirit policy, which was formulated in 1955 in the final declaration of the first Asian African Conference in Indonesia, Bandung. The declaration said that all nations and people have the right to self-determination, non-interference, and peaceful coexistence. So I think the region is at crossroads, a choice between neoliberalism, West imperialism, independence on the one hand, and the East, or multipolarity, sovereignty, and finally socialism. If CEE economies ignore the international cooperation and are left out of international cooperation and infrastructure project of Eurasia and Africa, the most dynamic regions in the world, if they close their eyes to the expansion of BRICS, Eurasian Union, Shanghai Cooperation Organization, Belt and Road Initiative, and so on, the deterioration of their competitiveness and the fall of the standard of living of their population will be inevitable. So my last word in this issue is that although the EU seems to be united, this is a very fragile and superficial unity. It is based on the dictatorship of the political elite of the European Union that serves the imperialist interests of the United States. With the awakening of the European population that will happen by the fall of their living standard due to the rise of a multipolarity in the world, the inner forces of imperialism within and between countries will clash. This will take first the form of a national fight for sovereignty on an international level that will make the evolution of a class struggle at national level possible and will open the way to socialism. Thank you very much for your attention.
That's lovely, Anna Maria, such a factual and, how can you say, a rich data evidence-based presentation. Really appreciate it. We will now go to our next speaker. Our next speaker is Radhe Pantic. I hope I'm saying that correctly, Radhe, but please correct me if I'm wrong. Radhe is an associate professor in the Department of Political Studies at the Faculty of Media Communication in Singidunum University in Belgrade. He's co-editor of the book Contemporary Marxist Theory of Art, and the author of the book Art Through Theory, Historical Materialist Analysis. His areas of interest include historical materialism, the theory of ideology, art theory, film and urban studies. And he's currently working on a Marxist analysis of Yugoslav and post-Yugoslav history. So Radhe, we are really looking forward to your presentation. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Radhika. Firstly, I can say that I share the conclusions of Anna Maria Artner regarding the decisive impact of German imperialism on Eastern Europe. And these are really three pillars of German economy, which is extremely export-oriented economy. And these pillars were, as Anna Maria said, cheap energy imports from Russia, outsourcing parts of the production processes in Eastern Europe and in Balkans. And these are labor-intensive and standardized parts of production processes, which is at the bottom level of value chains. And these processes doesn't require high-paid, high-skilled labor power, and increasingly exports to China. So during the reign of Angela Merkel, and especially in the second decade of this century, Germany tries to find its markets in China and other emerging economies, and its exports in EU were diminishing, and exports in China were rising. Even in 2019, Germany exports in China equaled US exports in China. No, and Germany economy is, I don't know, 4 or 5 times smaller than US economy. And it is now a crucial question if Germany can stay in this economic cooperation, or it will decouple from Russia and China, as the USA is commanding. And I think that the second scenario is more possible, and it will do a lot of more damage to German economy than to US economy. But I will now speak more from a global perspective, and then I will come back to Germany and its East European periphery. I think that we are now witnessing epochal change. And I think we are in the phase which Giovanni Arrighi called systemic chaos. The old systemic cycle of accumulation of capital, which was led by USA, is coming to the end. It is the systemic cycle of accumulation which started after the First World War. And now we have, we can see that the USA is not able to sustain, to organize accumulation of capital on a world scale. And we are in this phase of systemic chaos, where all power is declining, and we cannot see outcome of these processes. Maybe we will have some new power, like China, who will be able to restructure world economy, world system, or the other scenario is this disintegration of the world system, and maybe we have more regional system. It is a very uncertain conditions. And I think that it is now obvious that the US wants to delink China and Russia from the world system with very, very drastic measures. And it's forcing its allies to do the same. And I think that the primary target is China, and Russia is the secondary one. We can talk maybe in more detail later, but Russia is basically peripheral economy. It is what some Iranian called disarticulated economy. It went to disarticulation and deindustrialization in the 90s, and then it restructured its economy according to the needs of accumulation of capital in the core countries. Russia kept extractive industry, export-oriented extractive industry. There is too much investments. There is not too much efforts to diversify economy, to reindustrialize. And Russia had a ruling class which was satisfied to get profits from exporting raw materials and then recycle that profits on the Western financial markets. And I think that Russian elite wanted to be junior subordinated partners to USA, but USA had different ideas. They wanted to expel them, and we can interpret this Russian military operation in Georgia and Syria and now in Ukraine as a politics of deterrence. You know, they wanted to prove the USA that they are too strong and that they must accept them in this subordinated junior position. But China, I think, is something different. China has this developmental project. China has the project of autocentrical accumulation, especially during the great financial crisis. We saw the China is heading toward technological upgrading. China is heading toward boosting internal demand, building self-sufficiently, and China is going to invest in research and development and education. So China is able to attack monopolies in high tech of the West. And we can now see what is the strategy of USA. And this was not just, you know, madness of one man, of Donald Trump. We can see that there is a clear line starting from Barack Obama's pivot to Asia, then Trump's America First. Now we have Joe Biden's Building Back Better, and we have this new Washington consensus. And these are really drastic measures. It is not only provoking war in Ukraine, banning export of semiconductors in China. USA wants to cut all the exports for China and want to US capital and European capital to pull back its supply chains for China. It is an idea of complete decoupling from China and from Russia. And you have this new Washington consensus, which is based on some kind of restructuring of the world system, more protectionism, more state intervention, and reindustrialization of America, reshoring, bringing back American companies back. So I think that this is this decadent phase of the world hegemony, world, like Great Britain. In the first phase, it was the champion of free market, globalization, integrated markets, and now it's pulling back. And to go back to Germany, Germany has this model of extremely exported-oriented economy. And Germany is dependent on the free open markets. And this will damage much more Germany. And if the Germany is damaged, no, whole Eastern Europe is in much bigger trouble. It will damage their economies much more. And we can now talk about Hungary and Serbia, because these countries are placed, they are Germany peripheries, and the ruling class in these countries are Germany's comprador bourgeoisie. And what made possible these so-called or self-called illiberal regimes was Germany austerity politics. Vučić and Alexander Vučić, ruler of Serbian Progressive Party which is ruling in Serbia till 2012, was the close ally and junior partner of Angela Merkel. And he made austerity measures in Serbia. He brought new labor law, which was condition of possibility of super exploitation of Serbian working class. And what this new reindustrialization of Serbia did, namely in the previous phase of so-called post-socialist transition, the most of foreign direct investments in Serbia were made in the sectors of finance, telecommunication, retail, and real estate. Very, very little investments was made in the sector of manufacturing. And it creates a very big unemployment. It raised the level and standards of living of certain segments of the middle class, but it deteriorated standards of living of the working class. So what Vučić did, Vučić presents to Serbian working class this dependent reindustrialization, this super exploitation of Serbian working power, labor power by Germany capital as a developmentalist project. He was talking that this is new phase, that this is phase of development, that we are building industry, and it was some kind of the deal. I will get you a job, we will cut the rate of unemployment, but it will be raising in the rate of exploitation. So and this deal works, you know, rate of employment went down, but rate of exploitation was raising, and this dependent reindustrialization based on Germany capital was presented as some new kind of developmentalist project. And this orientation of German economy towards Russia and China give some ideological maneuvering space to Vučić. Radhe told in the introduction that East European Union country have this anti-Russian nationalism, but in Serbia it's the opposite thing. There are a lot of positive, popular, anti-Western nationalism and pro-Russian nationalism. And now it is, I think it's a big problem for the Alexander Vučić. And probably the only politician which is more popular than Alexander Vučić in Serbia is Vladimir Putin. So with this German politics based on Russia and China, he has some ideological maneuvering space. He can say, okay, we can cooperate with EU, with China, with Russia. He was marketing himself as the new Josip Broz Tito, leader of the Communist Party. We can cooperate. We are beyond this division of the power blocks. We have politics which is similar to unaligned movement and everything. But now, because this pressure to introduce sanctions to Russia to make ideological turning point will hurt him bad. So there will be, I think, very, very big economic problems. This pact which he had with working class is start to disintegrate. Middle class is already protesting, and hold this question about sanctions to Russia and problems of Kosovo, problems of Bosnia, etc. will bring him very much problems. And it is very correct if it is the question if West wants, if EU wants to support him, or West will we will try to find some oppositional party to remove him. And it is problem for that party because you cannot build ideological hegemony in Serbia based on pro-EU, pro-Western ideology. So for now, this is my presentation.
That's really great, Radhe. That's a great combination of the overall perspective and then also focus on what's happening in Serbia and of course also Hungary. So thank you very, very much. Our next speaker, sorry, did you want to say something?
No, I want to thank you too.
Okay, lovely. Okay, so our next speaker is Veronika Susova-Salminen. She's a comparative historian and political analyst, specializing in the modern history and politics of Central and Eastern Europe and Russia, with a methodological focus on world systems analysis, the dependency school, also with some influences from post-colonial critique. She graduated from Charles University in Prague with an MA in General and Comparative History and a PhD in anthropology. So Veronika, you are definitely going to bring a really interesting perspective on this, speaking as you do from Finland, but also specializing in the region that we are focusing on. So please go ahead.
Yes, good evening or afternoon or morning to everybody, and thank you for having me. In my presentation, I am going to specifically focus on Czechia because I am Czech, and I would like to put some more details about the Czech situation. Anna Maria was having great introduction, so I can skip a lot of things about Czech dependent market economy, because all these characteristics which have been said are valid for the Czech Republic. Nevertheless, I prepared a small presentation which I will going to share with you. Tell me if you see, and if you see the changes. That's the important thing. You see the changes. Okay, great. So I would like to focus shortly about the first about socioeconomic situation in the Czech Republic, and then on the political situation in the Czech Republic, because these two things are related. And unfortunately, the war in Ukraine is having not only socioeconomic results or consequences for the Czech Republic, but also political one. So in the socioeconomic situation, current time, of course, we have post-pandemic situation, which is still valid. However, within the next development, already in autumn 2021, so before the war started, in Czechia started the energy crisis. Energy crisis started with the bankruptcy of several providers of gas because of high prices. And this resulted in huge social problems for many people who were suddenly left out of the supplier, and suddenly they had to pay incredible amount of money for getting the new suppliers in prepayments. So the energy crisis is actually not exactly connected with the war, but the war make it worse. Because, as we know, the Czechia is also dependent or was dependent on the Russian gas. This everything was here. You can see for the comparison only what happened with the energy prices. I would like to add that Czechia was until recently one of the biggest exporters of electric energy. We were exporting mostly energy to Germany, of course. And recent months, you could see that the prices of the electric energy were the red spot on the. You can see that they were really growing quickly. We have one of the biggest prices, absolutely highest prices in V4 group, and one of the highest in the European Union. And you can see that the rise of the energy prices in general was very sudden, started basically in the end of the 2021 in the second part of the year, and during the next months the growth was really substantial. I call this already shock. This is the shock therapy which is going on in the Czech Republic at the moment. This is of course connected with the inflation. And again, inflation of course started already before, as we know, as one of the results of the pandemic. But however, the inflation started to grow substantially in the Czech Republic. One of the reasons is that our government, I will speak about our government very soon, a new government was unwilling to do whatever regulatory steps to tackle the prices of energies and to fight against inflation. They basically, they are all neoliberals, and they believe that if we let the things flow, it will of course somehow solve itself. So the result was for a while highest inflation, or one of the highest inflation in the European Union. You can see also that the rise of the food, for example, is substantial in the Czech Republic if you compare it with 2015. And you can fairly say that the impact of war, economic impact of war in Czechia are much more worse than was global financial crisis. Then, of course, with inflation, high prices, you have the decline of real wages. You can see the data which are coming from the Czech Statistic Office, and you can see that since the 2021, you can see it here, the real wages fall nearly 10%. Here, I would like to say that this number is very unprecedented for the Czech economy. Last time such situation, such deep loss was during the so-called transformational recession in the early 1990s. So this is next shock, because suddenly you have such huge decline of real incomes. Even if the wages, as you can see, nominally are growing, still the people are having less and less money, and they have to pay bigger and bigger bills for basic things, such as food, such as energy. You can also see on the other side, spotřeba is consumption. This is showing you only that the consumption is already very severely influenced by the situation. As you know, consumption in general is a very important engine of the economies, current economies. So in this sense, you can see that Czech consumption is falling down. This is causing already economic stagnation. At the moment, Czech Republic had last gross domestic product minus 0.4. So we can sum up that the socioeconomic impacts are quite severe, in a way even unprecedented. If you see, for example, the real wages fall, which is really high. On the other hand, you have situation which is the solution. The government, which is the government of conservatives, has two ways of combining things. First of all, they came with the idea that the problem of Czech economy and how to solve it is, of course, reform, and that it is needed, first of all, to do consolidation of budget. They don't have any specific ideas. Basically, the politicians which we have now in government all are living still in 1990s. So basically, their horizon of thinking about economy, about things is 1990s, austerity, privatization, market solves everything, and so on. State must be small and minimal, and so on. So they are combining two things. As you can see, they are coming a huge cuts of the budget. In this situation, which I was describing you, where middle class, not yet, but the weakest middle class is already falling down, their idea is to start to cut more in order to tackle the deficit. So you can see that they are trying to basically cut all possible ways. And before, as you know, neoliberals were usually using this way of reform public finances and the role of state in economy by opening the way for the private entrepreneurs and private firms to start to subcontract and basically create the space for rent seeking. As you know, now the rent seeking is not priority anymore. And you can see that they go really the classical neoliberal scenario. We cut the money of state. We will do the savings. They came with evergreen called pension reform, which is promising to people to go to pension maybe even in 68 age. So never for many people. They are promising tax reforms, which is going to put a higher tax on employees, so direct taxes on firms also slightly, minus 19%, gonna be 21. And of course, VAT, which as you know is a very one of the biggest income of the modern states, and also something which is influencing a lot of normal people and poor people specifically. And finally, healthcare reform, which will again put down the situations, the way how the care is provided for people. So you can see that this is the classical neoliberal scenario, only that the money which will be saved are going to be invested in weapons. The current government says that Czechia is under the threat. Russia wants to occupy Czech Republic, and it is Ukraine is saving us against that, and it is needed to modernize the Czech army, which is professional army having some 20,000 people now. And as you know, a lot of Czech equipment was sent to Ukraine already, and now the government is planning to do these investments. I will not say all this, what type of, you can see that it's a lot of money. I put there how much is Corona euro. It's a lot of money, which we don't have, I think, which will be taken from the people and put to machines which should kill people. And I would like to add that Czech Republic or Czechoslovakia used to be one of the biggest producers of weaponry in the past, until 1990s. Still, we have some industry left, but this will be not the way how the economy, will be revitalized, that we will make the guns, because majority of these weapons are American, Swedish, Israeli, UK, and so on. So this is the solution of the crisis and solution for the Czech economy. Finally, the political situation, and here I don't have very good news, or I think there is really huge problem becoming, because what we saw in Poland and Hungary before, it means that the one political force was trying to get the full control over the political system. This is happening now under the slogan "We are at war." Because our Prime Minister, Petr Fiala, openly says we are at war, even it's not true. Czech Republic is definitely not at war. And they are really trying to establish the unprecedented institutional hegemony, should basically be a next level of, opposition blockage. They want to blockage all opposition now under within the war in Ukraine. Fix the neoliberal silence. It means you can see that they are still continuing with the neoliberal policies, and actively pursue the neo-Atlantist, I would say, escalating policy, which is fully supporting USA and USA strategy against Russia and China. There is there can't be even any doubts. They call it the return to President Havel foreign policy, which is of course huge propaganda. It's not very true. At the moment, besides the buying of American weaponry, the government already negotiated security agreement with the United States, which will open the way that the United States military will have, and now they don't call it bases, they call it installments or something like this, because bases, we remember still Soviet bases, and it's very negative connotation, which will basically limit the Czech sovereignty in this sense even more, because these US forces will be outside of Czech laws. They will be established there. They will have own state basically within, as usually is. The attitudes of the leading politicians is openly pro-war now. Really, it seems that in rhetoric, at least, they don't have any breaks. They would really go to fight Russia if they could. And you have to realize that this anti-Russian position, this is a very important narrative for the new regime, which was established in the early 1990s. It is connected with the occupation of Czechoslovakia by Warsaw Pact, leading by Soviet Union, which is having, there is a huge mythology around it. And we have to realize that really 1968, meaning the August 1968, not Prague Spring, of course. Nobody wants to speak about Prague Spring. That's no. But the occupation itself, you know, it's really boosting the anti-Russian sentiments all last 30 years. So they are using this mythology now to strengthen it and to confirm it, of course. And anybody who basically is trying to criticize it or say, come on, like, stop with, like, we are 10 million nation and we are not interested in the Third World War because we would not survive it ever, are now called as disinformators, fifth colony, or traitors. This is official language which is normally used in the media. I have to say that, unfortunately, also in academic freedoms are severely limited at the moment. I can give you then a few examples of people who lost jobs for their opinions, academic opinions, expert opinions, not personal, not civic opinions. So there is a really situation of growing repression. That's why I call it neo-normalization, because if you don't know the history of Czechoslovakia, after 1968 came so-called normalization period, and this was the period of a huge repression, political repression, and not like Stalinist, of course, but a lot of people lost jobs. A lot of people had to, leave the places. There was a lot of expulsion from the Communist Party of Czechoslovakia, and it was a very dark period for intellectuals, for political culture, political system in general. So I call it neo-normalization. It's not the same. It's much more liquid form, but it is very similar. And just a few conclusions. By the way, the lady which I put there, this is Czech Minister of Defense, the lady who loves guns. So this is her. So, by the way, government also is trying to liberalize the ownership of guns in the Czech Republic. So militarization goes on also in this direction. So unfortunately, the resilience of neoliberalism in the Czech Republic is now turning into the specific alliance of neoliberalism and militarization and militarism, which is also targeting the society. You can see the new austerity measures, which are now called reform, of course, and their main purpose is a new redistribution of the wealth of the society, which means that money and resources will go for military spending. Ideological war started against any dissent, and really they don't see any nuances. They don't want to listen any differences. You just criticize these days government and you are pro-Putin. You are Putin agent and you should be silenced because you are traitor, and this is what is going on. Unfortunately, we have also the next problem. Besides the fact that media are owned by private, entrepreneurs which are connected with government, we don't have any real media freedom. The problem is that we have also very weak and fragmented left at the moment, because in 2021, Social Democratic Party as well as Communist Party of Czechia, they both were basically, they were not voted again back to parliament. So we have a weak left, and we have also a weak political opposition, because political opposition in the parliamentary level was left for two types of relatively populist politician. It means billionaire Andrej Babiš, who is like Czech version of Trump, but specifical, not same, but he is also such rich man who went to politics because he didn't anymore wanted to pay politicians himself. And then a nationalistic oriented party, so-called party of direct democracy, which is led by Tomio Okamura. Interestingly, he's half Japanese, but he's Czech nationalist. The sad story is that the war logic, really the thing that killing of people is normal, dehumanization, talk about traitors, closing the discussion, escalation is seen as a solution. Peace is the wrong word. You cannot say peace because peace means you want next Munich agreement and you don't want to help Ukraine. This is already on motion. So the situation is pretty bad, and the war is really at the moment creating a very sad and bad conditions for the Czech political system and Czech democracy, if I can call it still like this. Thank you very much.
That's really great, Veronica. Again, really factual and really making our understanding of the region much more complex than we've had it so far. So very good. Thank you very much. I will now go on to introduce Gavin Ray, our penultimate speaker. Gavin is a sociologist and activist living in Warsaw, and he has written extensively on political and economic developments in Poland and in Central and Eastern Europe. And he's co-founder of the Polish Transform Group Forward, or, well, I'll let him tell you the Polish name of the group. Go ahead, please, Gavin.
Okay, thank you, Radhe. Naprzód is the name.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Actually, a lot of what Veronica just said applies to the situation in Poland. A lot of what she described about the political atmosphere and so forth is very similar to what is occurring in Poland. What I'm going to try and do is to try to draw out a few of the contradictions, particularly the sort of social economic contradictions which are being caused by the war in Ukraine. There's many issues which I won't be able to cover. Maybe these will come up in the questions, but I'm just going to try to point to a couple of the main ones. I assume you'll see the slides change. If you don't, just tell me, please. What the kind of image of Poland abroad is being the country which is the most pro-NATO, the most vehement for supporting the war in Ukraine, and for urging the West to send more weapons and etc. etc. There is a lot of truth in this. As you can see here in this slide, this is just two opinion polls which are showing the support for Poland's entry into NATO on the left, and you can see how this rose significantly from a high level in 2014, and then arose again at the beginning of 2021-22, and stands around 94%, and also a very large section, or the largest opinion within Polish society is that the NATO actions in Ukraine are too weak, and very small proportion of society believing that it's actually too tough. So what we have a society, for historical reasons and ideological reasons as well, coming from the political elite, which is to give strong, almost ubiquitous support for NATO at the moment. However, there are a number of contradictions, particularly at the social and economic level, which are starting to exert themselves as the war continues. This is showing also an opinion of should Poland take refugees in from conflict areas, and you can see again a large proportion of the population, quite rightly, in my opinion, saying that they should take in refugees from the conflict areas. You can also see a small growth at the bottom of those who are skeptical about this. Other research, for example, shows on what do you have positive attitudes towards refugees, and so is showing that there's a minority, but a growing minority of people who are skeptical, at least, of helping Ukrainians within Poland. What you have?
Could I ask you to make this in presentation mode, because some people can't see the. So if you do presentation mode, which is right at the bottom, yeah, that would be much better. Yeah.
I press F5, I think. Yeah, this should do it. Yeah. This is fine. Yeah. Is that okay? What you have at the moment, you had 10 million Ukrainians have entered Poland since the beginning of the war. Around 1.5 have stayed. This is not easy to, because some have gone on to other places, some have gone back, etc., etc. It's not easy to exactly assess how many refugees have stayed in Poland since the beginning of the war, but It's around 1.5 million. This adds to about another 1.5 million Ukrainians who are already living in Poland. There's large waves of Ukrainians for economic reasons coming in the years prior to the war. So you have around 3 million Ukrainians living in Poland. This obviously has some benefit for the Polish economy because it adds labor, which creates value into the Polish economy. There are issues of economic issues which are being exacerbated, particularly in housing, because of a lack of housing which exists anyway, and no investment in affordable housing coming in Poland at the moment. You have other economic tensions which are being raised by this conflict, which are causing class tensions within Poland. One of the strongest of these conflicts is around the farmers' protests. What's happened is that the farmers earlier on this year began to protest because of the import of agricultural products into Poland. Because what happened at the beginning of the war is that the European Union lifted trade barriers for Ukrainian agricultural products. This has led to a slump in the price of Polish products, which has naturally led to farmers protesting, blockading grain coming into the country and so forth. What this then led to was Poland unilaterally blocking the import of goods in April. And then this has resulted in the European Union introducing a ban on Ukrainian grains and the government offering subsidies to help Polish farmers. Something I'll come to later, but this is an election year in Poland, and Polish farmers are a very important part of the electorate of the ruling Law and Justice Party. It also shows, despite all of this propaganda, if you like, from the EU and other countries, that Ukraine is on a fast track towards European entry, even in the midst of war, they're not able to maintain these open borders, and farmers are protesting against competition from the Ukrainian agricultural sector. What you've had on the Polish economy then, as in elsewhere, is a pressure on the economy. You can see on the right here that we have GDP growth. There's 2 quarters we've had negative growth. The last quarter growth has returned. Inflation reached around 18%. It's now come down to 14%. The Polish economy is not in a huge crisis, but people are starting to suffer. You can see on the left, real wages, because of inflation, has gone into negative territory for the first time in over a decade. And so this is beginning to be felt, the knock-on effects of the war on the economic and living standards of the Polish population. This is partly energy. Just again on the energy question, the Polish government at the beginning of the war said that it would stop all import of energy from Russia. It still imports around 10% of its oil from Russia. It also transits through Poland oil to the Czech Republic, and it's the largest importer in the EU of liquid gas from Russia. So despite it's significantly reduced its oil imports, but there is still a significant amount of energy coming through from Russia into Poland. One of the largest pressures on the Polish economy is the rise in military spending, and this resonates completely with what Veronica is saying. Poland, you can see on the right here, the black lines here are the revised military budget, which was introduced after the beginning of the war. The Poland plans to spend 4% of its GDP on military this year. It plans that by 2005, with the modernization of its military, will cost the equivalent of almost 20% of its current GDP. That's by 2035. All the military orders at the moment coming into Poland is around 137 billion euros. Most of these, actually, I'll come back to this in a moment. They also planning to build up the military of the Polish army up to around a military of 300,000 people, of which 50,000 will be territorial soldiers. This will make it that Poland has an army larger, for example, from Germany and France and so forth. It will be one of the largest armies in the world if they manage this. the very lot of skepticism that they will actually manage to build up an army of this size. Most of the military spending is in orders from abroad, particularly from South Korea and from the US. You can see here, this is planned military spending over the next 13 years or so. And you can see on the blue line, this is the percentage of the military spending which will be realized abroad, which will be buying products, particularly from South Korea and the US, not from Europe. The Polish government has said it won't buy products from the European Union because of its conflict with the European Union at the moment. So it's even bypassing Germany and so forth because of its tensions with Brussels and Berlin at the moment. So this is not even going to have a positive knock-on effect on the Polish economy and some kind of military Keynesianism, because the vast majority of this is being spent abroad. These is happening within the context of elections which are due to be held in autumn, probably in October. The exact date hasn't been set yet. Well, one of the major things to note is that there's virtually no differences between the major parties in Poland on the war. Basically nothing. They both shout at each other that the others are Putinites. Both sides, the Law and Justice Party and the major citizens coalition opposition both call each other pro-Russian and Putinites, but they essentially have no difference at all on their policy towards Ukraine. But what you can see here is the Law and Justice Party is maintaining a small majority in the polls, with the Citizens Coalition, which is the party led by Donald Tusk, coalition led by Donald Tusk, in second place. This is going to be a very tight election. I would at the moment predict, when the polls show, that probably the Law and Justice Party will end up as the largest party, and then but it will be a difficulty in who it's going to form a coalition with. On the red line, you can see the left, which essentially is hanging around. At the most it gets up to 10%. But an interesting development is this dark blue line, which is a party called Confederation. This party is a far-right party. It's a neoliberal and far-right party, but it's the only party in Poland which has taken, if you like, a skeptical line towards the war. But it's taken it within a position of anti-Ukrainian refugees. It's also the only party which talks about the historical issues, because one of the tensions in Poland, which has been mentioned before, with Ukraine, of course, is the history of the Second World War, of the murder of Poles, and the glorification of Banderites within parts of the by the Ukrainian government, and so on and so forth. They're the only party that talks about this, and with the underlying tensions in the economic issues and the building up by such forces as a sort of anti-Ukrainian refugee atmosphere, this is what they're trying to build on. I actually think they will get a reasonable result, meaning they could get up to around 15%, which could end up with a coalition government of Law and Justice Party and Confederation. This would be a difficult coalition government. But again, my guess is that the far right will do what they do everywhere, like in Italy. They will shout about the war and things like that when they're in opposition. If they get anywhere near government, they won't. They will probably just continue what they were doing before. So these are some of the tensions. There's other things we could talk about, for example, Belarus, the issues on the border of Belarus and so forth, and also Poland's position in the Belt and Road at the moment. Just very quickly on that is that Poland is actually, through the war, with the closure of routes from China, with goods from China in Ukraine and in Kaliningrad, the only northern route coming in of goods into the European Union is coming through a tiny town in eastern Poland called Maruszewicze, and this is actually now is the hub of Chinese goods coming in. So there's actually any sort of anti-Chinese propaganda or sentiment from the government or mainstream media is quite subdued at the moment, and for many economic issues, so that's basically what I have to say.
Okay, Gavin, again, thanks very much. We are continuing to learn an enormous amount of what's going on. And we now go to our final speaker, Attila Melegh, and then we will have a questions and answers. So Attila is a sociologist, economist, and historian, founding director of the Karl Polányi Center for Global Social Studies, where he was director from 2014 to 2022. He's associate professor at Corvinus University in Budapest, and senior researcher at the Demographic Research Institute, where I know he's been doing some excellent work on intra-European migration. Attila is also the editor of the well-known Hungarian left journal Eszmélet, which was founded by Lukács. He's the author of the book on the East-West slope, Globalization, Nationalism, Racism, and Discourses on Central and Eastern Europe, which was published by Central European University Press. And his newest book is The Migration Turn in Eastern Europe, a Global Historical and Sociological Analysis, which has recently come out from Palgrave-Macmillan. So Attila, please go ahead.
Thank you very much indeed. And it's been a very interesting thing to listen to all the other speakers. Because I think a lot of issues have already been raised and excellent insights has been given. So as a final speaker, I would like to add to this discussion certain elements. First, I would like to make some kind of a theoretical comment, and then I would focus on what has been going on in terms of development within Eastern Europe. Can we speak about a common region, or we are seeing very different trajectories? And very importantly, I would like to reflect on Hungary's position and what is the material background of Hungary's position and how it is actually maneuvering, because there might be some kind of misunderstanding here. But of course, these are going to be all questions, because what we definitely need is, as you can see, the new, very concrete, at the same time complex global historical analysis, and then still we are lacking this in these regards. So the first thing, how do we understand the recent changes globally in terms of socioeconomic history? And I think what it reminds me as a turning point, in case we go back a little bit more than 100 years. And then, because there was this very famous or infamous debate about ultra-imperialism, where Kautsky was suggesting that global capital, in terms of some kind of agreement, can manage within one imperial system, it can manage the whole world, and it can actually solve many of its internal problems. And then very quickly, Buharin came with his book on imperialism in 1914, and he immediately made the point that knowing the nature of capitalism, that more or less impossible. And then he argued that there is no chance for ultra-imperialism, but there can be only some kind of capitalist blocks fighting each other. And then he started speaking about Asia bloc, Europe bloc, and then America bloc. And then this would go on. Now, very interesting and very importantly, Lenin also followed some of these lines. When he wrote about the unification of Europe, he was making exactly the same point. So in that sense, that's very important. So in case we look at what happened since 1980s, is that there has been an attempt by the US to create an ultra-imperialist order. This was called, a unified center of a global market, plus very importantly, a complete hegemony of the US and organizing this all around the world. This was, of course, an attempt, and of course, this geopolitical and geoeconomic order has been extremely problematic because by definition, it was not able to handle many of the various interests of the different countries, including not small countries, but big countries like Russia, China, and so on and so on. Now, this kind of an attempt started fading in the early 2000s very clearly. I think that actually the situation, because the heyday of this ultra-imperialist attempt is really the early 2000s. This is based on an amazing mobility of foreign capital. It goes up into unprecedented levels in case you look at it historically. It went out back actually so high levels as before the First World War in a lot of ways. And then it was crumbling because the geopolitical system was also crumbling. I think the failure in Iraq, Afghanistan was a systemic failure. It was not just an accidental point where the US could not manage certain things, but it showed that it was not able to handle conflicts it generated, and it was not able to handle this. And then very soon came the 2008 crisis, for which there was no answer beyond starting pumping money into the economy at such a massive scale, which was unprecedented. Of course, this went back to some debates in comparison with the Great Crisis in the 1930s and so on and so on. I don't want to go into this. Now, what was the point here? What I'm trying to make is that this crumbling of the US hegemonic, geopolitical, ultra-imperialist attempt, what does it lead to? And I think there are several outcomes, and I think we still don't know it. One is what has already been mentioned very wisely, chaos. There can be a massive chaos. I think that was the understanding of Wallerstein at the end of his life. He was constantly talking about this chaotic period coming, unmanageable. The second option is that, of course, after the US hegemony, another hegemony is going to come into power. A lot of people point that China is able to reorganize it, but of course it takes a whole lot of time, a whole lot of energy, and then the whole system is absolutely unclear whether China is willing to take this at all. In my understanding, they are not attempting to have a single global hegemonic position because they would not, it would not fit into that strategy what they have been following up till now. We can also see this, nonetheless, I think this blockification or the new blocks re-emerging, that's a big chance. And I can see that a whole lot of moves are going on. The recent development in BRICS, Russia's maneuvering in this, China is maneuvering in a lot of ways in this. So there is some kind of a counter-hegemonic bloc is emerging within this same system. And then this is going to be a new scenario. The point here is that this is a period of dramatic instability, a dramatic increase and intensification of conflicts, plus, very importantly, a dramatic reorganization. All states are going to be shaken in this period. If this goes on, we are talking not something minor, we are talking about something very big. There are some estimates that this kind of new security blocks and supply chains means the redirection of 25% of the foreign trade. If somebody has an understanding of scale, what the redirection it means and what kind of a challenge it means, then I think we should be really horrified by this development, because of course this cannot go without conflict. This resecuritization of capitalism and reorganizing the supply chains and the trade and then minerals and so on and so on and so on. So that I think is super, super important. Now the next point I would like to go in, and this was my starting point. The next point I'm having is, of course, what about Eastern Europe? And I'm not going to repeat this, which has been eloquently told by Veronica and Anna-Maria as well, this kind of a dependency problem. Yes, there is a dramatic dependency problem in Eastern Europe, but I think the problems are even bigger than just dependency. And I will try to make this clear. The first thing which we need to observe in semi-peripheric areas like Eastern Europe is a dramatic contradiction around the state. The states are in a very peculiar position in semi-peripheral countries because, especially in an ex-socialist region, where there are high social expectations, is how to please capital, how to please foreign capital, and maintain some kind of a social system at the same time in an ongoing demographic decline of the whole region, where the demographic fragility of the region is increasing dramatically. I think this is the only solution for this in the capitalist framework is to have a very stable and high level of growth, because then enough income is generated to solve and then to handle some of the tensions emerging. Otherwise, in case they get into some kind of decline economically or anything, then their troubles are unsolvable in a whole lot of ways. And what I think is important now for most East European countries is that how they understand how this economic growth can be maintained. Now, there is an illusion, structurally speaking, could be a structural illusion, that Eastern Europe is very homogeneous, but Eastern Europe is absolutely not homogeneous. And these countries are following very different trajectories for a very good reason, because of course these countries are small countries which can be influenced by all kinds of historical linkages in various ways. So in case we look at it, I just want to go into this very quickly. I would differentiate between some kind of a Central European pattern, like the Czech, the Slovakian, the Hungarian, and the Slovenian pattern, which is, as Bola Grešković put it once, they were aiming at some kind of a embedded neoliberalism. That is to say that after socialism, they tried to maintain some kind of a social welfare system, while other countries completely abandoned it. Then we have another version, and even Poland is in that, in my understanding, Poland, Romania, Albania, which reduced much of the welfare systems. Poland is in between in a lot of ways, and actually it's trying to come back in certain measures and family support and so on and so on. But for a while it abandoned that. Now this became an emigrant Eastern Europe, that is to say, but with a very important difference between the Central European and this one. The Central European is much more dependent on foreign direct investment. And actually, very interestingly, Poland and some other countries are much less dependent on that. And then there were two other types. I don't want to go into this. Of course, the Baltic republics, which were also falling into two parts, Latvia and Lithuania being very different from Estonia in a lot of ways, plus very importantly, the failure countries like Ukraine and Moldova, which failed completely as early as the 1990s, and they were not able to come back at all with a viable strategy, and they have been in the hands of struggling local elites. Now, the point what I'm trying to make is, and now I'm trying to focus, and this is the last point, I'm trying to focus on my own country, Hungary, which is, of course, one of the most tantalizing countries in the whole region. Now, in case we look at possible material background for the Hungarian policies, is its amazingly unprecedented dependence on foreign direct investment. So in case you look at this comparatively, Hungary is a world recorder in a lot of ways, how much it is dependent on foreign direct investment. In certain years, the net inflow of FDI can be as high as the total GDP of the country, which of course is a mixture. It's not just investment, it's a lot of financial moves are also happening here. I'm just trying to point out that it is extremely dependent on that. Even in case we take all the big waves out of these developments. Now here comes something very important, because that tantalized me, that I could find as some kind of a very specific thing. Serbia is not that different in a lot of ways. And then I started looking for policy documents in Hungary, whether my assumption can be proven or not. And then even luckily recently, the new economic minister became rather outspoken. So I could gather two things. One is the foreign policy document of the country, which actually very clearly, crystal clearly argues that it is trying to move between different blocks. It is trying to capitalize. It's a kind of a, they're talking in a kind of a network language, that they would like to be a node in these networks. So they are trying to connect these things, and then Hungary should rely on this maneuvering between the different blocks. The other point is that they would like to rely more foreign direct investment, but not from the EU. Now that's very interesting, because what's going on, and then this is a very recent discussion going in the circles of the Hungarian government, is that they say that they are fed up with the EU because it is coming, of course it's representing capital, I mean that's not a question, but they have political conditions, and they don't like these political conditions, because that would hinder their neoconservative, kind of neo-nationalist, kind of ideological framework, in which, first of all, these conflicts are okay, plus they really don't want to see the tutelage of the European Union over the economic policy of Hungary, and they would like to go beyond that. And now they started talking about that they would like to become some kind of foreign direct investment machines, and going into the world and getting as much foreign investment as possible, because they argue it's even better than the subsidy of the EU, because, you know, this is excellent because it is coming into the exact points of the economy where it is needed, plus it is producing sustainable revenues, I mean capital revenues, right, which is going to partially help the Hungarian budget as well to maintain certain things. So I think what they are having in mind in this, that they would like to have this super foreign direct investment kind of a machinery, in which they are making the nodes and the new networks, and not the EU. And this is how they would like to get out of this. Now, in case we take this seriously, then I think it can be a reasonably good answer why Hungary is actually, at least in Marxist terms, why Hungary is actually following what it is following. Plus, one more thing I would like to add as a last point is, of course, that this is also a shift, and then we can hear it. Even we could see it in the speech of Vladimir Putin as well. So there is this new buzzword of looking for infrastructure investment, and then in that sense. Now, here comes one, and this is the very last question. What does it mean in case they want to have more foreign direct investment? Now, it can mean a lot of things. And actually, we have some evidence for various things. One is that this is the way how the dominance of the Western foreign capital, they are trying to counterbalance this. That is to say, they are playing out these different fractions of the capital to each other. Or it is for a cooperative thing. And actually, Chinese investment is not really competing with the Western investment, but it is built together, right? And I think one of the key things what we need to figure out, in case we want to understand the policy development here, is which is going to be the main tendency in this development. Finally, how much embeddedness and socialism comes out of this? Now, there I have enormous doubts and questions. I think more foreign direct investment and being a super hub of foreign capital from the point of view of Hungarian workers and employees and the society, and even development. And I have very big questions to think about. But otherwise, thank you very much.
Okay, that's really great, Attila. Thank you very much. We have about 25 minutes, hopefully, to have some good question and answers, because there are all these presentations have raised lots of interesting questions, I'm sure, in the minds of people. So while you're thinking of your questions and formulating them and raising your hand, I'm going to give Alan Freeman a minute or two to tell you something about the International Manifesto Group. So Alan, please go ahead.
Okay, now, I don't know if I'm going to stop here. I think, Radhe, because you're not muted, you're occupying the speaker screen, so I can't
No, you are. I can see you. You are the
Oh,
main.
okay, that's fine. I don't know why, but I'm seeing you. Yes, I'm just going to sort of say a few things about how you can help make sure things like this happen. And I'm sure you are now convinced after hearing all the speakers that's necessary, and we organise many such activities. We are completely supported by our own people like you. We don't have any advertising. We don't have any big corporate supporters. We don't rely on clicktivism. We rely on your donations. Now, we've been over time building up some support, and I would say we're now at the level where we get about 1/3 of the money that we actually need to remain viable. That is to maintain our 3 websites, to maintain the YouTube channel, to organize these activities. So we need a push. And the thing that is going to be most useful is to get regular donations. We've had some quite substantial donations, and they are very welcome, but we don't get stability unless you have many people giving $10, $20 or whatever it is, the currency that you wish to make every month. So how can you do this? I'm going to share a screen now and hope that that allows me to illustrate how you can do it. This is one of our YouTube videos, and this is probably the simplest way. Can you see the screen picture of Radhe about to talk? Is that okay? I'm assuming it is. I can see.
Yes, yes, it's okay.
Now, if you take any video that we've got on our YouTube channel and you scroll down, you see a description, and at the bottom, you can see the different ways that you can donate. You can donate to Patreon. Patreon is actually very useful because it allows us to communicate with you. So that's probably now our preferred method, but you can also PayPal if you don't like it. We're in the process of substituting a new payment system, but you can make a regular donation that way. Or you can go to our International Manifesto website. And if you go there, either visiting it directly, you see 3 new buttons, which we've added, big blue buttons, so you can't possibly miss them. Maybe they should be red, but they're blue. Anyway, that's our color at present. It's a bit like the Republican Party in the United States. It's red and the Democrats are blue, so we're blue. You can donate, you can volunteer, or you can subscribe and get regular updates every week of everything that appears on our new Cold War site. If you hit the donate button, you come to our donate page and you'll see all the options there. So please do that. Please consider making a regular donation of however large. Patreon is to be preferred, but there are many other ways to give us money. And of course, if you feel like giving us a single large donation, we're certainly not going to turn it down. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Alan. And perhaps you can share this website on the in the chat as well. And people can consider reading our manifesto, exploring the website, and also perhaps consider volunteering. Okay, having said that, I know Yuri has a question, so I'm going to let him go. And I'm sure that there will be other questions. Please, if you don't know where to find the raise hand button, it'll be either separate on its own or it'll be under the button called reactions. So please use that. So Yuri, please go ahead and place your question. I have Yuri and Kobe. Yeah.
Thank you, Professor. Hello, and fantastic presentations, and always great what the International Manifesto organizes. My question to the panel is: does anyone on the panel think that the current the current pan-Eastern European left, and possibly even the global left, should start to move beyond its anti-communism leftism in order for the left to advance itself in Eastern Europe? And I'm curious what the panel thinks about this as a possible solution to the Ukraine conflict. Will Ukraine be partitioned into 2 or 3 countries? West Ukraine, with Kiev as its capital, being aligned with the West and NATO, and Eastern Ukraine either being split into 2 independent countries or joining the Russian Federation, as they cannot tolerate the current pro-Western Zelensky government and its neo-Banderite movement. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Yuri. I'll take 3 questions to start with. I have Robbie, and then I have a question from Brian Green in the chat, so I will place that. So Robbie, please go ahead and put your question.
Thank you. My question is a bit more basic than everyone else. I'm from Indonesia, Bandung, so I'm not really that familiar with Eastern Europe. However, I did a research on the Russian-Ukraine war for my bachelor thesis. So I was a bit curious because there's this stance commonly seen in Ukraine and Georgia that they were part of a colonized world, such as by Russia. So like all of Eastern Europe, specifically the former Soviet republics, were colonized by Russian. And then this is a fight against colonialization, and Russian is the bad guy, and they need to support whatever movement is going against them, be it the Rose Revolution, Orange Revolution, or even the war that is going on right now. So my question will be, how much is true? And is there any nuance in the conception? Because it's quite ironic, in my opinion, that both the biggest supporter of this stance came from Georgia and Ukraine, which were part of the ruling parties in the Soviet Union. So that would be my question. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And the question from Brian Green is the following. There is an increasing number of reports that East European countries led by Poland are pushing for a peace agreement with or without Zelensky in Ukraine. Could the panel please address this question? So how shall we go do this? Shall I just go in the order in which people presented and begin with Anna Maria and end with Attila? Perhaps is that the best way? Yeah. Okay, I think I'll try that. So Anna Maria, would you like to respond to any or all of these questions as you like, as you please?
Well, thank you very much. I am not to say any specific things concerning the questions. I just would like to raise the problematic of left and nationalism in connection with the actions of imperialism, and it is in connection both with the problematic of Ukraine, Georgia, and also the left, the position of left in Eastern Europe and globally. So I think that today there is a new wave of nationalism which the left must take into consideration and understand that there is no socialist left without defending the sovereignty of nations. And today we see that these are not the Western type Marxist movements and parties who defend the sovereignty of nations, but these are the conservative political movements and parties. And also the left doesn't like these parties. It has to realize that in this situation, when the very first task of the mankind is to overcome imperialism. So in this situation, every progressive forces, and I don't mean neoliberals as progressive because they are for imperialism and for capitalism. So all anti-capitalist forces must cooperate with those nationalistic forces which aim at gaining more independence from imperialism. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Anna Maria. Next, we will have Radhe. Radhe, would you like to respond to any or all of these questions?
Firstly, I would like to respond on, to give some comments, short comments on presentations of other panelists.
Sure.
Firstly, on Veronica and Gavin. They both talked that there is introduction of new austerity measures in Czech Republic and Poland, and that these savings are then redistributed in military sector. Maybe we can read this strategy as a US strategy to externalize cost of the Ukrainian war on EU. And a second comment is on Attila. talk about Hungarian position and strategy. And there is a big difference between Viktor Orban's economic model and Alexander Vučić. Both of these politicians came to power on the rage of so-called losers of transitions. These were working class, but there is one important difference. Viktor Orban came to power and he was backed with this national capitalist class, domestic capitalist class, which had a lot of resentment because of favorable condition to foreign capital in previous phase of transition. And there is opposite situation in Alexander Vučić rules. Alexander Vučić is first truly comprador, because before Alexander Vučić, there is very strong local tycoons. And maybe we can talk that Hungarian project is or was some kind of attempt at what Rui Mauro Marini called sub-imperialism. It is Marini talks in Brazilian case in 60s and 70s that Brazilian is intermediate center of accumulation. And maybe idea of Hungary was, and this idea was more possible in this China, Germany, Russia nexus, which I think is not possible anymore, to become some kind of regional sub-imperialist, to build some kind of regional sub-imperialist position, to collect these foreign direct investments and then to organize their distribution through Balkans and maybe part of Eastern Europe, some kind of regional sub-imperialistic power. And we know that I think that Vučić was willing and to be a senior partner in this coalition, and maybe we can read his idea of open Balkan. It is an idea of the single trade zone in the countries of Western Balkan as a part of this Hungarian project. But I don't know. I think it is only an attempt, and I don't know how strong is Hungary to push this project. Maybe I can talk a little bit about Robbie's questions about Russia and imperialism. I think that we can't classify Russia as a capitalist imperialist state. It's basically peripheral states, and it doesn't have structural capacity to exploit Ukraine, Georgia, etc. And if we look at the things from economic perspective, it was losing economically to subsidize Ukrainian economy, to give them cheap raw materials, energies, to finance Ukrainian metallurgy. There is some economic evidence that Ukrainian metallurgy is not viable without cheap Russian energetics. So Russia was losing economically, and what she wants is these countries to politically cooperate, because Russia needed this security buffer zone. So if Russia had some monopolistic high-tech industrial productive sectors, and then she needs cheap labor power or Ukrainian resources, then it will be capable of some kind of imperialism. But I think it is basically a peripheral economy, but peripheral economy plus nuclear arsenal and Kinjals. Oh.
Sorry, I just would like to have a quick follow-up question. You said that Orban represents some kind of national bourgeoisie. and Vučić represents a kind of is a kind of comprador of the first order. So what exactly is the character of the national bourgeoisie in Hungary? What do they invest in? Who are they exactly? How do they relate to foreign capital? And conversely, what is the character of this? What is the capital to which Vučić is trying to make? Vučić has a comprador position.
If we're talking about Orban made rooms for national capitalists, and he made room in financial sector, in retail, in construction, in agribusiness, in medias, etc. And during the reign of Vučić, we have a decreased participation of domestic capital in financial sector. In all big retail chains, which were controlled and owned by local capitals, were sold out to foreign capital. So Orban built some national capitalist class, which is still subordinated to German capital, German industrial capital, but Vučić is I said pure comprador. He doesn't have a local capitalist class behind him. He has some local capitalists, which is part of the state economy center, and it is basically what all periphery countries are doing. They don't have a ruling capitalist class which is able to accumulate capital, so they're getting some gains from corruption, public procurements, and little bit in real estate sector, in pumping financial bubbles, speculative bubbles in real estate, and in sectors of service. But his national capitalist class is much thinner than Viktor Orban's.
Okay, great. That does shed more light on things. Thank you very much. Our next respondent will be Veronica. Veronica, please go ahead.
Yes, I will perhaps start from this question, which was asked us last one, that is about the Central Eastern European initiatives or governmental initiatives about the peace, because I am not aware of any such activity on the official level. I'm just aware about different civic association and activities of some politicians who are trying to talk about diplomatic solution and about the peace, about trying to stop the escalation cycle and return to the negotiations. But this is usually very marginal, and at least in the Czech case, these initiatives are usually again attacked for being pro-Putin, even it's not true, and so on. But on the governmental level, you can see that they are firmly on the track of escalation and supporting the US policy in whatever the US does, whatever NATO does. At least in the Czech case, Slovakia is more different, but at the moment, Slovakia is in deep political crisis with a weak president who is not able to solve it, and before elections. So there is even more complex situation than in the Czech case. They have really already 1 year ongoing crisis, which is not solved. So this is the question of peace. This is perhaps also related to the question about anti-communism and the left, because I have to say that what I observe is that the left in the Central East Europe, and specifically in the Central Europe, I think it's also divided pretty much about the issue. And I know many leftists who are supporting escalation, anarchists, former anarchists, who are attacking other leftists for trying to find the diplomatic solution and talking about peace negotiation, necessity of peace, because people are indeed dying. So these leftists are fully supporting the confrontation. They are fully supporting this vicious cycle, which can end, eventually in the apocalypse, because if they will push too much, it can really, who will control the situation. So the problem of the left is that it is divided now in many places of the region outside of the parliament and fighting against each other. So this is making the situation even worse, and really there is a huge campaign against peace, appeasers they call them, you know, and using the Munich agreement and these parallels. Then there was a question about the decolonization process in Ukraine and Georgia in relation to today's Russia, to Soviet Union. Yes, I agree with Radhe. He said it correctly that Russia is a specific type of the power. It was always organized very differently than the classical capitalist hegemons. It means that it was actually, if you look, for example, on the socialist bloc, you could see that Russia was providing not technologies, but material. It was providing exactly the opposite way how the Western colonialism was organized. In the Czechoslovakia, we were making technology. In Hungary, autobuses and so on, and Russians were sending, you know, steel, and they were sending fossils and so on. It went to the Soviet market. So this was the same during the Russian Empire time, that the political core which was controlling the politics was actually economically weakest, while Baltics, Poland, these parts were most developed economically. Finland, for example, was even seen as a laboratory of the modernization of Russian Empire. We tried there, and we will see what will happen, and so on. So this was always specific. I think there is some true about the decolonization thesis, but I think it is much misused in the current context, because we have to realize that this is not a decolonization from Russian hegemony, which should end to the decolonization itself. It is recolonization by the West, because on the other hand, you know, they do everything in order to become again the dependent periphery of the West, of the United States. So it's you know, they are misusing the fact that there is decolonization, and of course the Soviet imperialism was problematic for many. For Czechoslovakia, for example, what happened in 1968, we have to understand that it was a huge humiliation, but this is not any emancipation. This is the way how you look at Ukraine before the war started. I mean, before 2022 war, not this in 2014. This was struck on completely neoliberalized, completely imitate what was given in the West, completely imitate the Polish and Central Eastern West European experience of imitation, dependent economy, you know, all these things. So this we have to realize that there are nuances. It's not decolonization from somebody to become independent. It's to become dependent again.
That's really great. Thank you, Veronica. Very important theoretical clarification that you gave. Next, I will ask Gavin to respond, please.
Okay, thank you. I'll respond mainly to this question, which was about the peace plan. Again, similar to Veronica, I've heard nothing about this here, quite the opposite. Who knows what's happening behind doors, of course. You never know what's going on, but I've heard no indications that anyone within the Polish political class is pushing for a peace agreement at the moment with Ukraine. In fact, on the opposite, one of the most worrying things I've heard in the last few weeks was a week or two ago when the former NATO Secretary General Anders Rasmussen, who is also the advisor to Zelensky, he said that if at the NATO summit next month, NATO doesn't give concrete security guarantees and whatever to Ukraine, that and a path for Ukrainian membership into NATO and so forth, that you could find that Polish and Baltic states will send their soldiers directly into Ukraine, not under the NATO umbrella, but on their own. This for me is an extremely worrying trend. Whether this is just one statement, what is I've noticed in this war is what starts out as something on the periphery and seemingly extreme very quickly becomes mainstream, you know, when sending tanks, F-16s and so on and so forth. And this is another way of essentially NATO and the West throwing the Eastern European countries under the bus. You know, you go and do this, you won't have a NATO guarantee, you'll get the cheerleaders in the West, it's just more you know, Eastern Europeans fighting Eastern Europeans, we take our side and so on and so forth. You know, it's similar to the export of depleted uranium from the UK into Ukraine. Who cares if depleted uranium and radiation and all the effects of this is happening within Eastern Europe? Who cares, essentially, at the end of the day? And this kind of push and a really dangerous attitude of going along with this by part of the Polish political class at the moment. Just answering one of the points I think was made by another speaker in a question saying about austerity in Poland. There's no austerity in Poland at the moment. I mean, there's obviously problems and not enough investment in certain things, etc., but there's no direct austerity. The present government, the Law and Justice government, the reason it's won it got re-elected and will probably form a government again this year is that it's increased social spending, particularly in family spending and so on and so forth. It's decreased poverty. I mean, I could go into limits of this and etc., but this is essentially what they have done. What the problem is at the moment, they're going into the elections promising more social spending. The problem will happen after the election, because if you're going to raise up your military spending to 4 or 5% of GDP, then you're essentially going into guns, not butter. And this is when the tensions will start to rise. And there's nobody in the mainstream opposition who is putting up any opposition to this. And in fact, there's a whole kind of narrative at the moment that Poland is becoming a superpower. This is what you get in part of the political and intellectual class here. That Poland is now, Germany is weakening. Poland is now going to take over their place in Europe, and we have to have huge investment in the military to make ourselves this superpower. This is a very strong argument at the moment, which is going on, and you know, a dangerous one, I think, going through. Quickly on the left, there was a question on the left: should they go beyond anti-communism and so forth? Well, yes, they're not. The left at the moment is not doing this, though. The left has essentially been submerged into liberalism for the vast part of the last 30 years. You have to remember that Poland, like Hungary, at the beginning of the 2000s, you had left parties, social democratic successor post-communist parties were governing. In Poland, the left had over 40% winning the vote. They had the president and they had the government. And the austerity measures they did at that point, similar to the Hungarian government, meant that the left completely collapsed in these countries and has never come back as a serious power. And the whole sort of talk in the Western liberalism about populism and right wing, the reason you had this rise of the right in Poland and Hungary and so forth, part of the reason was this collapse of the left. And the collapse in the left, which has happened in other European countries, started here first. Yeah, I'll finish on that point.
Really great. Thank you, Gavin. And Attila, please go ahead.
Yes, very difficult questions. There's something where Gavin finished, the position of the left. Of course, we have to see it historically. So yes, much of the so-called social democratic left has been eaten up by the liberals and the middle right center. So they have been completely swallowed, and they are not going to get out of this at any time. They are already, it's gone. The other left, which I treat as a system critical left, which is extremely small, but even here I see two dramatic things which weakens in Eastern Europe. I'm not saying completely, but now with the war in Ukraine, that's even worse, because now, so part of the radical left is still aligned with the kind of a human rights, radical human rights liberals in a lot of ways. And then they are taking this identity question, they are taking all kinds of issues very seriously, and this is where they are going. So it's eaten up there, and now the war it's making the whole thing even worse because they're moving into that direction. The other part we also have to be clear is this is supporting nationalist capitalist states, which is, I think, a very serious another danger which is going on in my understanding, because altogether we have to be, I think, real. And I've been recently reading and commenting the book of István Mészáros, The Beyond Leviathan. There's a very important warning that now we are in a situation when these capitalist states are getting us into some kind of a mud, and we are not going to get out of this. And then it creates some kind of extremely cataclysmic scenario. So in that sense, I think what the radical left has to take seriously is to maintain really the system critique, not to forget some of the key Marxist points in this, and to position not for today, but for the day after tomorrow. That's, I think, very important, at least what I see in Eastern Europe. And what Veronica said very importantly, we have a dramatic duty going back to socialism and to reinterpret socialism, because socialism has been largely misunderstood in various ways. And I think this would be much more helpful than being dragged on some kind of a current debate and so on and so on. I think that would be much, much better. Now, the other point, what Radhe was also coming up with, and then Radhika, you also asked about this bourgeoisie. Now, that's a very interesting question, that whether there is a difference between Serbia and Hungary, and whether Orban, yes, Orban is partially doing this authoritarian path because he wanted to regulate Hungarian bourgeoisie. So he's basically maximizing political power in order to control national bourgeoisie, plus feeding it at the same time. So taking certain things away from global capital or from Western capital and reallocating. So the state is buying up and then reselling things in these ways. This is an old technique in Eastern Europe, but Orban is also doing that, and then is also trying to support the export of Hungarian capital as well in neighboring countries, in Ukraine, in Russia, and all different parts. That's also, you know, a classic position of such a state, and in that sense, that's very important. Now, there was one more question, and I don't want to go into this. Is what to achieve. I think, I just repeat myself again, is that we have to maintain that imperialism has been a global system, and we have to maintain this position not to fall into certain traps, which are not going to help us in the longer run. Thank you.
Thank you. That's really great. We are at about 10:10, so we are already a little over time. I wonder, however, if all the speakers want to take about a minute each, just saying how they think from the way where they're looking at it, from how they're looking at it, how they think the war will end, and with what good and bad consequences. Shall we just go in the same order? Is that, I'm not sure whether that's a good question, but Anna Maria, did you want to make any brief statement on that?
I think that Russia will win, and there will be, if any, then a very small Ukraine, which shouldn't be a lion to Russia.
Mm-hmm. Radhe?
Okay, I said at the beginning that this is the phase of uncertainty, so it is not easy to predict, but I think there is one optimistic thing, that there is a chance now for an anti-imperialism. And I think that I was talking about China's development, but that development was development within capitalist world system. And maybe this is historic chance to China and China's ruling elite to understand that if they want to stay on power, if the China continues to its development, they need now something more. They need some anti-imperialistic project, and I think this is historical chance, because you know, when we had the October Revolution, it was revolution in country which was a peasants country, semi-feudal peasants country, and you had to start to build anti-imperialism and socialism from the bottom. Now we had a country which is nominally communist country, which has technological power, a serious military power, and I think that this aggressive, drastic measures of United States maybe can ignite China to some project which is more socialistic and more anti-imperialistic.
Okay, thank you. Veronica?
Well, I also don't want to do any prognosis because it's not unclear. We have such huge information war around what is happening in Ukraine, and that you cannot guess what is the result. I really hope the war will end with the peace, with the compromise agreement. I really hope that it will not escalate more, and I really hope that the politicians who will deal with this war will understand that there will be no peace in Europe until we don't deal with how to create security system together with Russia, not against Russia, but with Russia. Even now it sounds, of course, like science fiction because all is built against Russia. But unfortunately, this is, I think, the important point, that until they don't understand this and not believe that they will change the regime in Russia before that, and Russia will become same like them, because Russia will never be the same, then there will be no peace. So let's hope that it will end with compromise, with the compromise and peace agreement, and that the process which we see now, which is the rebuilding of the Iron Curtain, actually, only they moved it few hundred kilometers to the east, which is a huge shame. And for me, who thanks to what happened in 1999, I could study, I could travel and everything. When I hear that they are building the same for Russia now, and it should be normal, this is a huge disappointment and really the tragedy. So I hope that it will end like this, and hope that also people, the politicians in the Central East Europe will realize that the way how they do the politics is actually endangering the national survival, actually, of these small nations, and not the opposite. That would be the great. So optimistically said, even I'm realist, and at the moment the trajectory is opposite.
That's great. Again, thank you. And Gavin, and then Attila.
Yeah, again, I like Veronica, I don't want to make predictions. I realize I'm no expert on military issues, and how this war is going to end is who knows. I mean, I agree with Veronica that hopefully as soon as possible, that the war here feels very real. It feels very real from the beginning of it. I mean, the first, leaving aside what the political ideological things, there was a first few months particular was a very discernible atmosphere of fear. And there's a kind of, within the Polish society, Polish elite, a sort of Schrodinger's cat attitude towards Russia. On the one hand, in the first period of the war, there was this feeling that they're coming. The Russians are coming through, and they're going to be, and their aim is to take Ukraine and then to come into Poland. Then the other side of it is look how weak Russia are. They're completely useless. They can't do anything, and they're just about to lose. Neither of these positions are true. And so what happens when we get to some form of post-war period or frozen conflict period or something like this? How do then the societies deal with this situation, which is where both essentially predictions which have been put forward have been proven to be false? On just one thing, at the beginning of this meeting, I mean, Radhe said, for example, at some point in Poland there are moves to take over Lviv and so on and so forth. There's no serious voices in Poland pushing this kind of line. There's always been some voices on the side, because the relationship between Poland and Ukraine is contradictory. On the one hand, you've had the what we talked about before, and the Bandera, etc., etc. On the other hand, you have this long history before of Poland having essentially a kind of colonial attitude towards parts of the Ukrainian land that used to belong to Poland, and so on and so forth. What would happen in a post-war situation where Ukraine is divided, Ukraine is essentially collapsing? Who knows? My big fear would be that there would be a push at some point for Poland to go in, even as peacekeepers, so-called peacekeepers. Kaczynski talked about this at the beginning of the war, that soldiers could go in, and so on and so forth. My fear is chaos, as what's been said before. My fear is a period of chaos in a situation where there's a weak left, and this will shift things further to the right. I don't want to end on a pessimistic point, but you know.
There it is. No, thank you. That's really a good analysis, and I think a really good overview. And Attila, we give you the last word.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Then two little things, not little, big things. First, I do think that this is why I'm a hardline socialist. So socialism is able to settle certain things. And then in this current capitalism, we are not going to be able to solve problems. That's one of the starting points. And as soon as I see some kind of a real reach out for reorganizing key economic institutions and integrating people into that, and then as soon as I see that, I'm going to be extremely optimistic, because then I can see that the lesson has been learned and we are getting out of these things. Otherwise, as Lukács would put it, we have all kinds of capitalist forced consciousness. But the second point, I don't want to take it too easily. I think I'm also not a future teller, but I see definitely two concrete things. One is within this continent after Yugoslavia, this is the biggest ever wound now. And actually, to be honest, much bigger than Yugoslavia itself, because Yugoslavia was a little bit different scenario with different dynamics. So in that sense, the wound and the collapse in and around Ukraine is unprecedented. And very importantly, I can very clearly see that this is when the Soviet Union is really finished in terms of any understanding in the whole region among people. I travel quite a bit in the region, and I even teach there. So I talk to a lot of people. And you see, this is when I see that they are completely departing. Everybody is falling into its own little nationalism, and everybody is shouting at each other like crazy, which means that the solution in the whole ex-Soviet territory is getting problematic. And I'm very much afraid that these conflicts are going to continue. Plus, very importantly, knowing the character of, of the various states, plus seeing the dynamic of NATO, which was mentioned by Rasmussen and all these guys, the conflict is going to continue for a very, very long time. And in case we are reorganizing blocks, then we are going to have even more conflicts, even more tragedy. So to be honest, the saying of Rosa Luxemburg is getting a little bit too acute. Barbarism and even the collapse of humanity is not out of touch at the moment, in case we don't find alternative solutions. The good news is that, of course, humanity is learning. So I'm a very firm believer in that. I think the second lesson about capitalism after the collapse of socialism is going to be much more dear, but they will learn the lesson in some ways, in various ways. Now that's all what I wanted to end with.
Well, thank you, Attila, on that note of the triumph of hope against some very obvious adversity. I think you're absolutely right, of course, that a large part, insofar as there is chaos in the world, it is because of the retreat of the left over the last so many decades, and nothing is more urgent than the rebuilding of a socialist, anti-imperialist left at the present moment. It's the only force that's going to bring order out of chaos, and a good order rather than an authoritarian one. Thank you so much. I see somebody has just said, use the word magnificent, which I think I will use again. It's a great presentations, very thoughtful, very informative, shedding a lot of light on what's going on right next door to the war. So thanks very much. And please look out, as some of you have already commented on the fact that we have postponed the other session, which we had mistakenly scheduled also for today. We will be sending around a notice about the imperialism webinar as soon as we can. So please watch out for that and other webinars. We may be taking a break during the month of August, and we will come back with a lot of exciting webinars, including, I must say, one on fascism, which you will all be very interested in. So please stay tuned. And for the rest, thanks very much and see you next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
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 Thank you much.